Hey everyone, we've started a new arc. Make sure to stick around for my closing thoughts because it's going to be a wild ride today. I don't have much for opening comments because I'm honestly just super excited to get into the episode. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, like the video, and leave a comment below. I'm sure that after today's episode, there's going to be a lot of questions. And away we go. It's a clear, cool morning in the land of fire. Various ninja squads cover the countryside, performing all manner of ninja missions. Perhaps some are picking weeds or recapturing a terrified cat for an insane owner, while others are on protection detail or attempting to retrieve information covertly. But around Konoha, there are about a dozen teams on patrol duty. They monitor the roads and woods around the ninja village to keep it safe, or at least alerted to any impending troubles. It's been lackadaisical in the last few weeks, and even these patrolling ninja can afford to take it easy. Two men in particular have been paired together to patrol a westward road, while their teammate and leader follows the same road eastward. One of them stretches and yawns, perturbed that they were made to wake so early, despite how calm things are right now. The other shivers and rubs his arms in an attempt to warm up, remarking that they could have at least had breakfast with a fire. The tired one spends his time in silence, paying attention to nothing in particular, attempting to daydream. The cold one carries on a one-sided conversation, talking about that waitress that turned him down, but the mail lady who said yes. But instead of finishing his stories, he would excitedly flip to something else, as if trying to lure his partner into a real conversation. The cold one flips a kunai around his fingers and remarks that his shuriken jutsu is probably best in the squad, and he wonders what the tired one's best skill is. Slowing to a stop, the tired one looks down, offward from the path. Stopping as well, the cold one follows his gaze to a kid, laying face down in the grass. The kid is emaciated, his clothes overlarge for his tiny frame. His skin isn't even visible through the blood and dirt smeared across it. Casually approaching the boy, the tired one nudges him with the toe of his boot, but he doesn't respond. Sighing, the cold one complains about whether they'll have to dig yet another grave. Why do they always find the dead ones? Looking around quickly, the cold one suggests to just carry the boy into the woods and call it a day. That way, the vultures won't be bothering travelers. The tired one ignores his teammate and kneels beside the boy. Grabbing him by the back of the neck, the ninja lifts him and the boy gasps for breath just once before passing out fully. Dangling from his neck is a leaf forehead protector, rusted all the way through. Gasping at the forehead protector, the cold one picks up the boy and without a word of affirmation to the tired one, rushes the boy to Konoha. A child of 12 runs through the streets of Konoha. Various shopkeepers and citizens going about their day barely have time to look up before the child's gone again, whizzing past in a flash. He pants a little bit because he's been running for a while, looking for his ever-elusive sensei. The illustrious Lady Sanin asked him to find his sensei, even though they weren't set to do a mission today. However, the sensei had many hiding spots that the child had to check. Through town, up to the Kage heads, and to the training grounds, the child runs. He eventually runs into another ninja kneeling at a large black slab, a memorial stone for those lost in battle. The man solemnly runs his finger along the bottom of the tablet, tracing its newest additions. "Kakashi-sensei!" the child shouts, ignorant of the respect the tablet earned. "I haven't seen him," Kakashi responds, familiar enough with the child's plea to already know the question. He's asked it so many times before. "You missed out on a really good crop," Kakashi mutters to the child, but the latter's already turned and dashed away. "Obito, Rin, I didn't think I'd have to see this many more people that I cared about on this stone. Stopping at the top of a building on the edge of the village, the child shouts into the air, "Sensei, where are you?" Meanwhile, as part of his daily walk around before getting started, Shikamaru is at the front gate, making small talk with Izumo and Kotetsu. As always, he asks them if there's been any interesting characters so far this morning, and as always, it's a boring no. "Sensei!" the boy screams from far down the street. Looking up from their seats, Izumo and Kotetsu chuckle before relaxing again. Shikamaru, meanwhile, looks up at the clear blue sky and shakes his head in exhaustion at the kid's persistence. Finally getting to his teacher, he repeats with a hint of annoyed anger, "Shikamaru-sensei, I've been looking all over for you." "I told you to stop calling me that," Shikamaru tells him quietly. "I'm not your sensei." "Until the old lady says different, you are," he argues back. "If Lady Tsunade heard you call her that, you'd be flat as a pancake right now." Kotetsu laughs at the kid's boldness. "She sent me for you, and I've been looking everywhere," he says, ignoring Kotetsu's jab. "Look, Konoha." Shikamaru stops midway as two men scramble through the gates calling for help. Dashing to their side, Shikamaru clearly sees the boy they're carrying and help them with him. The boy weakly raises his head to Shikamaru, and his eyes open for just a second to meet Shikamaru's. "Choji?" Shikamaru gasps, heart stopping from shock. Shivers run across his body as Shikamaru's racked by every emotion surging through him. "Konohamaru, go tell Tsunade that Choji Akimichi has been recovered, and she needs to get to the hospital to retrieve him." Shikamaru tells his maybe student, turning to the guards and telling them, "Bring him to the hospital with all the haste you can muster." Meanwhile, Shikamaru finds himself unable to move. He had accepted that Choji was dead by now. The feeling he had was shock, like literally watching someone raised from the dead. The tablet for those killed in action has never had to have a name removed from it. "Choji, where have you been all this time?" Shikamaru asks in a whisper, watching the other men rush his best friend to the hospital. By the time Choji woke up, Shisui had already taken him far from the village. He initially struggled, but Shisui was far stronger than he was, and it took a single sharp jab to his stomach to send that message. However, it felt as though Shisui wasn't keeping a firm grip of him, and every so often, Choji would put up momentary resistance. But Shisui was having none of this struggle, bludgeoning Choji repeatedly until he lost consciousness. When he regained his senses, it was nightfall, and Shisui was sitting tight against a tree, nearly invisible in the dark. For the still disoriented Choji, it felt as though the only thing he could see was Shisui's red Sharingan eyes, glowing in the dark as they darted back and forth, as if he was hiding from someone in particular. The hazy memory of this night faded to black, and Choji woke in Shisui's grip yet again, as the turncoat quickly approached a small hill amidst a sea of a forest. By this point, Choji had learned not to fight. Instead, he chose to conserve his energy, as he was already hungry anyways. If he needed a burst of energy to escape later, it was best not to use it all in a futile struggle. Stopping before reaching the hill, Shisui releases Choji from his grip. Falling to the tree limb, Choji finds his footing and tries to straighten before Shisui cracks him in the head with a lightning-fast kick. "I don't need you anymore. The damage is done," Shisui's voice echoed in Choji's head as he teetered from the tree branch before falling to the bushes below. Disoriented and weaving in and out of consciousness, Choji wondered whether this was the end. As he struck the ground, consciousness yet again slipped from him. It was now, as he slept in the brush on the ground, that Team Jiraiya passed by, unaware of the sleeping boy they searched for, snoozing a stone's throw from their position. Ko Hyuga was conserving his energy. Without Lord Jiraiya to lead the group, they needed to be much smarter with the energy they used. And so, the heir to the Akimichi clan was accidentally passed over by the very people who sought him out. Waking again, Choji experienced a smear of time as night turned to day and back to night again in a flash of delirium. Voices were echoes of whispers, impossible to discern. Up and down, left and right were together the same for him as he weakly turned his head in a failed attempt to rouse himself. He was sure that he was restrained, as he was unable to lift his arms from his sides, and assumed Shisui had decided to take him after all. Through this blurred reality, he finally hears someone remark, "I tells ya, I ain't never seen no one so fat before." Another voice, deeper and more refined, continues, "Check out his forehead protector. He's a leaf shinobi. Judging by his age, probably a genin. A forgettable loss for the land of fire. Someone so wide around the waist could work for a long time. Maybe have the energy to work at least 5 times harder than the others," the second voice agrees. Blinking, Choji finds himself on the ground in dirt. Beside him are 6 other people. 2 of them are younger than himself, 3 are young adults, and 1 is a very old man. They're all thin, nothing but bones wrapped in skin. And they all have shackles around their necks and wrists, with chains connecting them all together. The old man holds out a bowl of water to Choji's mouth, his thin arms shaking slightly. Choji accepts the water, still feeling dizziness grounding him. The old man tells him, "You can call me Kazuhiko. I'm a farmer from the land of grass." When Choji tries to talk, he feels queasy and turns all of his attention to the water to avoid throwing up. One of the younger adults, a woman beside Kazuhiko, introduces herself as well. "I'm May. I'm a tanner from the land of water. You're in the slave quarters. The doors are open, but if we try to leave, we'll get in trouble." The others introduce themselves as well, but Choji is still too delirious to remember all their names. Squeezing his eyes shut, he asks where they are and how did he get here. When he attempts to sit up, he realizes that he too has been laden with chains. Kazuhiko explains to him that he's been lucky enough to find his way to being a servant for the great sage Pain. The sage is the savior that began fighting back against the tyrannical Hanzo and his corrupted guard. No one knows where the sage came from or why he chose to fight to free them from this torment. But from the moment he set foot in the land of rain, the great sage became the first person to step up for the little guy. And he was more than just words, immediately establishing a territory for his new disciples. Squinting at his shackles, Choji asks that if they're in this Pain's territory of freedom, why are they in chains? "The fight's not over yet," one of the younger children tells him. "It's up to us to continue building fortifications and harvesting crops, so that the divine army of the great sage can continue their march of triumph." Thinking to himself, Choji realizes that these people have all been indoctrinated or tricked in some way. There's no way that someone from another nation would so freely put their life down for the rebel in another nation. There had to be something else at play for these people to so willingly stop caring about where they were from. To completely alter one's allegiances, they had to either be tricked or enslaved for a very long time. Hanzo had attempted a war on the land of grass to the north and the land of stone to the west at the same time. But while this would have been marching his people off to death, the great sage Pain stepped in to directly challenge Hanzo. Since then, Hanzo's had to funnel all of his resources into combating Pain. Some still died, such as the poor wretches stuck under Hanzo's influence. But Pain was minimizing this as much as possible, putting all to work who would oppose him. The enemy of today provides weapons for us tomorrow. Everyone eventually sees the truth that Sage Pain brings with him. Hanzo was egomaniacal, driven to world domination in a reckless and ruthless fashion. Without the great sage's intervention, the land of rain would have imploded long ago. And so the days passed. Choji was given 1 day to recover before the overseers put him to work alongside the other slaves whom he had already met. The overseers rode around the small river village on horses. They wore a spiked baton with a straight sword each. Both weapons seemed for combat, but even Choji knew that the baton was meant for slaves who got out of hand. He decided to keep his head down until he got a proper read of the situation. The overseers didn't seem to be ninja, so he was confident he just needed to wait for the perfect opportunity to make his escape. Each overseer watched over a small group of about a half-dozen slaves, and there were about 15 overseers overall. His group was assigned to building a bridge over a small river. Given his youth and strength, Choji was assigned to pulling the stone and placing it correctly. But his partners were all very weak, and he took it upon himself to pull up their slack. This goodness in his heart did not pay off. Every evening, each of them would get a tiny ration of bread, half potato, and a small cup of tea. It didn't matter whether they were children or adults, all got the same. Luckily, with his fire jutsu, Choji was able to cook the potatoes for them. The nameless overseers didn't seem to care a whit whether he used jutsu either. Kazuhiko, more than the others, often split his bread with Choji, citing that if any of them needed to keep their strength, it was him. Even when Choji refused, Kazuhiko would leave the bread aside for anyone else to eat. Mei would share sometimes, but Choji didn't blame her for wanting to keep as much as she could. It was made clear to him as well that if he tried to store food for later, the overseers would just confiscate it, leaving him with less overall. Day in, day out, without a moment of respite, Choji and the other 6 were set to work as often as possible. And as time passed, so did Choji's own strength. He felt it waning, from lack of eating, from overworking, from lack of sleep. These people didn't care to keep up a strong labor force. Afraid that too much of his strength would soon be sapped, Choji decided that he needed to attempt a getaway at long last. He was so focused on keeping people's eyes off him that he didn't track how long he'd been here for. Whether it had been a week or a month, Choji honestly had no idea. But it had been too long regardless. One day, while the overseers were away to receive their own orders, Choji snapped the shackle around his neck into pieces. It was much weaker than he expected it to be. On the other hand, depending on how poor these people were, they might not have wanted to spare good metal on chains for slaves. His hands remained cuffed, but the chain attaching him to the others had been connected to his neck. Looking around for the overseers, Choji made a dash for the cover of woods nearby. But he stopped. He didn't spend any time getting to know the others enslaved with him, but they were so kind to him nonetheless. And so he was abandoning them to a suffering they just didn't deserve. Individually, they all had homes that were better than this place, but they endured because they didn't have the strength to escape. Face contorting with longing, a yearning for freedom, Choji relaxes and takes a deep breath. He turns back to the slaves, who all watched him with genuine fear. He wasn't sure if this was a fear for repercussions or a fear that he was leaving them behind. But it was in this moment that he decided that he wouldn't leave them to their fates and selfishly flee. He was the only one who had the strength to escape, so he would only do so with them at his side. Returning to them, he apologizes, and when the overseer returns, Choji continues to play his part, alerting the overseer that his shackle broke. And despite alerting the man to the faulty chains, Choji's still pulled aside where the overseers brandish their batons and beat him. He's got less cushion now, having been starved for as long as he has. So when the batons strike him, there's no buffering for the impact. They just strike bone, and the pain radiates through him. Just like in the Forest of Death, Choji feels a surge of fear run through him as their weapons fall upon him. But he no longer had Shino or Sakura to rely on for hope. And just like last time when he withdrew into himself to reach for the courage to push on, all Choji found was an empty void. There was no determination, no bravery, no cowardice, no fear. It was just nothingness staring straight back at him. He was given no bandages to treat the wounds as he was thrown into a barred cell, exposed to the elements. It rains on him constantly, for 3 days straight, before the overseers finally decide to free him and let him rejoin his fellow slaves, reattaching him to them. While he rests alongside them, he decides to orchestrate a grand deception, grabbing at the mud around him and stuffing it under his shirt. And so the days pass. They finish the bridge and are set to work making a watchtower. As weak as Choji had found himself become, he was still stronger than nearly the remainder combined. And as much as they tried to help hoist the stone slabs at the upper levels of the tower, Choji found that he was still doing the vast majority of the work. They were never given any blueprints, instead they were to follow the express direction of the overseer. At each level of the watchtower they built in a window on each wall. These windows were tall and thin, barely possible to fit an arm through, but likely incredibly defensible. On one particular day, Choji was wrapping a slab in the ropes to cradle it for the winch to lift, while the others were inside ready to pull at his call. Kazuhiko, the old man, was helping him get the rope around this particularly large block. When they gave the go-ahead to the others inside the tower to pull, the rope pulled taut, but they weren't strong enough to lift it. Running inside to help them, Choji anchored his feet to the ground with chakra and heaved on the rope, easily pulling the slab up. But the slab was more secure with a steady, continual pull, while Choji was wrenching on it in gaps. Bracing himself for another hard tug, the rope suddenly lost all resistance, causing him to crash to the ground. Recovering, he and the other slaves ran outside to see what went wrong. The slab had indeed slipped and fallen back to the ground below. However, it landed directly on Kazuhiko, killing the man instantly. Distraught from the accident, Choji blamed only himself and welcomed the beatings from the overseers. His mind unconsciously withdrew defensively, and he again found himself in the void, mired by an endless nothingness. Thrown in the cell again, the overseers berate him, asking how it is he's still fat after all this time. For another 3 days, he sits. Straight ahead from him, he can see Kazuhiko still laying on the ground. The overseers don't find any value in cleaning up the mess, so Choji has to stare at it for 3 days. Every now and again, he feels a brutal anguish attempt to grip him, but he pushes it away and embraces the void. When he's finally released, the overseer asks him how he can starve for 3 days and still be fat. In a dead tone, Choji tells the man that he has a slow metabolism, before walking ahead of the man back to the slaves' quarters. Ultimately, despite how he's treated, the overseers are happy so long as he's doing his work. They didn't seem to care about the old man's death, and it was swiftly forced from everyone's minds as a new nameless slave took his place. After Choji was freed from the cage, some men must have come in the night to dispose of Kazuhiko's corpse, because Choji never saw it again. They were intentionally leaving it out to torture him. But Choji didn't care anymore. The void kept his mind safe. And every night, after continuing work on the watchtower, Choji sits in the mud and scrapes away at it, little by little. After embracing the void, Choji decided the pride of the leaf emblem was no longer important, removing it and hiding it in his pocket. And so the days pass. There was one day in particular when the slaves were rushed to the quarters in the middle of the day and the overseers gathered to fight off an attacking force. The village had no real defenses other than the watchtower still in construction, and wouldn't you know it, the overseers fled to that tower and the attackers toppled it. But Choji didn't care. The void kept his mind safe. Right when it looked like the overseers would be utterly defeated, a man with long red hair appeared. He wore a long black cloak with red clouds adorned across it. He stood between the overseers and the attacking men, halting the offending party completely. The void withdrew, and Choji found himself pressed against the bars as he watched the red-haired man lift a single hand and throw the attacking party into the sky. They flew so far and so fast that Choji wasn't sure if they would ever land back down. As he turned to face the overseers, his ringed eyes lingered on Choji. He did not smile, but neither did he appear cruel. Standing, Choji reached toward the man, voicelessly calling out to him. Approaching Choji himself, the man knelt and inspected Choji carefully. "Hakamichi?" he asked softly, pushing a knuckle into Choji's remaining pudge. "No wonder things are getting done here," the man smiled, speaking softly enough that only Choji could hear him. "They actually have someone worthwhile." Without sparing another word, he straightened and returned to the overseers to help them recover. Choji wondered how the man knew who he was, but before he could entertain the thought, the other slaves surrounded him. "The great sage spoke to you directly?" Mei celebrated, blown away by the interaction. "Saved by the sage and spoken to on the very same day? Choji, you are blessed." That was the great sage, Pain. Choji had no interactions at all during their visit, but his own father told him that the Uzumaki clan was known for their red hair. That man had the very same. Choji knew nothing about Hanzo other than his reputation, but if a man who didn't have to use hand seals to throw a couple full squads into space was Hanzo's enemy, Choji wasn't sure how a struggle for supremacy was even taking place. There's no way Hanzo was just as strong as that. Was there? Mei tells him that it's been a very long time since Hanzo's men have attempted an assault, but it ends the same every time. The overseers begin to lose, and then their savior, Sage Pain, appears to squish the attack instantly. If Mei didn't know better, she'd think that the great sage was a god. Just as quickly as Pain appeared, he also disappeared, and everything returned to normal. And so the days pass. One of the younger children in their group disappeared one day and just never came back. One of the other adults broke a leg, and when the overseers took him away, he vanished forever. Choji was sure that the overseers were taking the invalids away to execute them. But Mei was sure that they were all brought to a hospital in the great sage Pain's home, where it was said that he could even raise the dead with his skills. Choji thought it was an insane suggestion, but then again, Pain failed to disappoint every time he showed up to instantly destroy any offending parties. And then one day, Mei disappeared too. She got a cut on her hand that, even with Choji's medical assistance, became infected and slowly festered over the course of a few weeks. He woke up the next day to find a different slave in her shackles. He stayed behind to save them, but now was the sole survivor. Sighing, Choji sat in the slave's quarters and waited for darkness to come. While he sat, he lifted his shirt and pulled out clumps of dried mud that had been balled together with grass. He felt so much cooler as he removed these. Suddenly, the mysteriously fat Choji was fat no longer. At every chance to take the rope that he could, Choji was using everything to keep up appearances that he had remained fat. The overseers were just too stupid to notice his face was thinning more and more each day. With this deception, they never changed out his shackles for smaller, suitable sizes. And so, they easily slipped off of him. The slave that replaced the old man, Kazuhiko, looked up at Choji as he stood unimpeded by the shackles. This slave remarked quietly that he had been here for 8 months now, asking Choji how long he was here. Choji shrugs at him, unsure, but also in disbelief that Kazuhiko had been dead for 8 months. That means that he may have been there for a year. Shaking his head at the lost time, Choji looks one last time at the poor souls that slept around him. Even if anyone saw him leave and called for the guards, Choji was confident he could evade them in this darkness. Without a look back, comfortable now in the void, Choji disappears into the night. "Is he okay?" Konohamaru asks Shikamaru, running to Choji's other side and then back to Shikamaru. "Yes," Shikamaru answers. "Stop. You're in a hospital. Behave yourself." "Where was he? Didn't you say that he disappeared before the fall of Iwa?" Konohamaru asks, leaning on the foot of the bed. "We'll find out as soon as he's well," Shikamaru tells him. They sit in silence for several minutes, but the young Konohamaru is as restless as can be, fidgeting constantly beside Shikamaru. Lady Tsunade saw to it that Choji was properly assessed first. He had no immediately concerning injuries, though he had several scars across his back that she thought were signs of torture. After rehydrating him, Tsunade told Shikamaru that they just needed to wait for him to wake up. He was likely exhausted nearly to death, and it would take several days before he woke up, and several more for him to be fit enough to be debriefed. But Shikamaru was fine with that. He had come to be known in the village as the sole survivor, which burdened him with a guilt that consumed him on some nights. Choji was finally his anchor to sanity. The sooner he woke up and spoke, the sooner Shikamaru could return to some semblance of normal. He had waited for 3 days already though, and even his patience was growing thin. As loud and annoying as Konohamaru had been in these last few hours in the hospital, Shikamaru was starting to hear a ruckus in the hall that was just as loud. Telling Konohamaru to stay put, Shikamaru got up and opened the door to investigate, only to find several medical people running past. Izumo tries to sprint past him as well, but Shikamaru stops him and asks, "What's going on?" "Big week, Shikamaru," Izumo tells him, almost shouting in excitement. "We've recovered Neji Hyuga. Cliffhanger jutsu in the works." Oh boy! I'm so excited for this next arc, and hopefully you got a nice little flavor bomb of what's going to be. Time has passed. How much time? Well, you're not entirely sure yet, are ya? Peace seems to have returned to Konoha. I mean, why else would ninja be sent on normal missions again? Shikamaru seems to be fine, but maybe he's the only one. I made sure to drop a lot of little nuggets of information to insinuate what's been happening since last episode. Over the next 30-ish episodes, we're going to be taking a look at all of this and more. And of course, we have young Konohamaru chasing Shikamaru around like a lost puppy. What's that all about? And Choji! This dude has not had a very fun time. But he is the first character in my rewrite so far to have met Nagato, who is walking around on his own. No need for possessing Yahiko. And Choji was away for a while, right? Many of you have already guessed it, but just in case, I won't reveal what the contents of this next arc entails. By the end of next episode, it should definitely be clear as day. But as indicated in this episode, it won't all be sunshine and roses. Brace yourself for both ups and downs in the coming episodes of this rewrite. You've all heard it before. The sky's the limit.